Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Been hearing a lot over the last couple of days about things like Uber and Amazon and Airbnb and PayPal that many of us are using on a day-to-day basis. And our perceptions and responses to those things are our user experience. Organizational culture is the assumptions, the beliefs, and the behaviors that govern the actions of our organizations. And today, we're going to explore the intersection of those two things. My name is Kristen Bailey. I'm a senior principal with Collective Next. We help organizations use design to solve problems. I would like to have you help me welcome our distinguished panel today, who I will have introduce themselves. And if each of you will tell us the organization that you're from and who is your customer.
Yeah, sure. Hello to everyone as well. My name's Adnan Khan. I work for BBH. I head up our European digital client experience. From a customer perspective, we service asset managers and institutional banks primarily.
Thanks, Adnan.
Good morning. My name is Lee Marnie. I work for ANZ Bank in Australia. My role there is to head up wholesale digital for the institutional bank. And our customers are those institutional and corporate customers across Australia, New Zealand, and 31 other geographies in Southeast Asia.
Hi, my name's Kendra Thompson, and I lead Accenture's global wealth management practice. I focus on the future of advice, what will investors pay for, and how are leading firms, banks, and incumbent wealth management players evolving to deliver that at scale. My customers are the executives of large banks and wealth management firms, and certainly they're obsessed with how to transform their customer experiences and corporate cultures.
Hi, my name is David Watson. I work for Deutsche Bank. There I'm responsible for our digital cash products and also run our Americas cash management business. My customers are two main segments. One is correspondent banks, so many of you who are at this conference today, and two is the global MNC community, so really the target clients being the top 450 MNCs in the world.
Okay, welcome. So to keep us grounded in this idea of organizational culture, I know it's really easy for us to be, there's a lot of discussion about the user experience and bringing those together. I want to start out with some thinking from Edgar Schein, who is one of the foremost experts in organizational culture. You may have read some of his books. He's an author. He's a professor emeritus at the MIT Sloan organization. And I've seen him in his more recent years. He's getting to be an old guy, but still very smart and experienced around culture. Talk about the fact that organizations are often saying, hey, we need to have the culture project. We need to, figure out how we're going to change our culture. And he talked about how that would be similar to saying when we have a problem individually, hey, I've changed my personality. You don't usually do that. You think about what's the problem. Oh, geez, I need to lose a few pounds, and so I have to modify some things. I have to change some behaviors in order to make that better, or I need to be communicating better with my spouse, I understand, because there's some things going wrong there. You don't say, I need to change my personality. So I want to start out with a question, and maybe Kendra, have you help us, since you have broad exposure across organizations. What is the challenge that we're trying to face around user experience through organizational culture?
Certainly, yeah. If you think about how user experience has evolved, it started out, someone in marketing, someone with the title digital or someone responsible for a portal, would do a user experience project. And what we're really seeing happen is it's driving into the core of the business. And as it drives into the core and we start to understand that we must be customer obsessed and customer focused, we need to redesign our value propositions from the outside and really deliver on what our customers want and want to pay for in new and flexible ways. You bump up against culture right away. Whether it's a lack of risk aversion, a fear of trying something that you can't say for sure will pay off, whether it's the way we fund change and the way we measure success. Oftentimes we'll see issues around P&L structures as a barrier to doing the right thing for a customer, internal competition or the way in which strategies and change are adopted through the organization. So certainly we see the two very intermixed. And as our industries need to transform themselves at the very heart, you can't do that without addressing the culture from the top all the way through, and really identifying the places in your culture where barriers, whether they be people or process barriers, are stopping you from doing what your customers want and are willing to pay for.
I really resonate with that commentary, especially with with it being led from the top. And then the leaders in the organisation having to live and breathe this. This is really important. If it's not done that way, and the leaders of the organisation, you've got to think of yourself as a leader in an organisation, if you're looking after people, to drive those values down. And unless that gets done, you won't succeed. At ANZ, our CEO Shane Elliott has been very public about wanting to drive the bank to be a digital bank in the areas that we operate in. And also making sure that what we do is aligned with our vision and purpose, which is shaping a world where people and communities thrive. And this is drilled into us, and we need to make sure that these values are also what we live and breathe every day.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with both. I think when you look at it, it's really from an organizational perspective, you need to understand your underlying clients. And I think those clients are changing, actually. What they need is changing. From a day-to-day perspective, the way in which they engage has changed. So from a corporate perspective, you need to think about different ways in which you can engage with them. And I think that's fundamental. But I do agree that there's a philosophy and ideology that needs to be created across an organization. And it needs a strong leader, but I think you need to also internally market that.
Yeah.
You need to build that internal brand of digital first. I think about my clients digitally from a solution perspective. And I think if you have quick wins, and I think if you can show value to underlying clients very quickly, that's where that ideology, that philosophy starts to permeate. It's a contagion in my mind. It starts a contagion from every single individual, and you get ideas and different ways in which you can innovate across an organization. But I would also say, and we've heard about it at Cybers quite a bit, diversity in skill sets.
Yep.
Fundamental when you think about being innovative, having different ideas, bringing different people together, creating these horizontal virtual structures where I would say you can explore ideas, and I'm going to use this word fail fast, but actually I would say redirect your idea to where it needs to go to, I think is absolutely fundamental. And the final thing is understanding from an organizational perspective time. Time works against new ideas potentially, so allowing that germination period, that diversity in skill set to permeate. So I think it's that whole philosophy that comes from the top, but I think each individual, if you see quick wins, you very quickly have that trending across an organization.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I definitely agree that leadership has to create the framework and the guidance and dictate which flag on top of which hill it is we want to all go and get together. But for me, I think it's when I think about the organizational cultural shift that has happened and continues to happen around user experience, it's really about the individuals and about the individuals starting to think not about how they build a functionally rich product of the future with 9 million aspects of feature functionality. It's really about them actually being, it's bad to say this, a little bit lazier from a product development perspective, and actually bringing the clients in to design, develop, and deliver the products for them. And by doing that, what you actually realize is that it's not a conversation around how many aspects of functionality do I have in a system or a product or an offering. It's actually how do I make it simple and easy for that client to achieve the objective they're trying to achieve. And that objective could be to not even do something in my landscape. It could be just to get in and get out and achieve what I need to achieve. But really bringing those clients closer to the individuals that drive, own, and design, develop, and deliver products.
And I think you're right, David, there. I think you hit the nail on the head, really. You need to understand the end-to-end user journey. Yeah, you need to understand every aspect of it. And the honest answer is let's say there's 10 stages to that user journey, but if 9 of them are terrific and 1 isn't, the overall product and the user experience is not going to be good. That's how we think about it in our day-to-day lives. So there's no different from a client perspective, fundamentally. So I think to understand that user journey is absolutely critical.
Typically what I see though, and this would go across the whole industry, is everyone can get themselves a little bit excited about net new capability add or doing something cool for the first time. The real heavy lifting of being a customer obsessed, truly customer-oriented business is not just in the bells and whistles you add on, but it's in the things you stop doing as well. And what we find is generally most executive teams can articulate a target state, this aspirational state where they're truly customer-led and their customers choose them because of the experience. And typically they can find a whole bunch of really cool things to start with in that first year. Maybe it's a launch, maybe it's an acquisition, maybe it's a pilot, and there's a lab somewhere, there's a hackathon, there's something cool going on. The real heavy lifting and the work that I focus on is what happens between the two. And in order to do that, you must stop doing certain things. You must change your core business. You have to do more than just listen to the clients. You have to actually change the way you make money. And a lot of times we find organizations struggle with that.
Let's explore that a little bit. So what are some of the behaviors within your organizations that you think don't serve the industry and your organization anymore? What are some of the things that you've either already had to abandon or you think you may have to abandon in order to really move your culture forward to this customer centricity?
Well, I think that we're guilty in the past of letting technology dictate the experience that we want to drive out for the customer.
Sure.
And so what the customer gets is an amalgam of what technology can facilitate, but also in our world, we work with institutional and corporate customers, and we think that they're complex. But at the heart of it, the people that are using our products and services are just like you and I, and so they want things simple anyway. And so I think that keeping focus on making sure that these things are simple, because we want to use them in the way that we experience, the apps that we use on our phones and so on and so forth every day. And just throwing stuff at customers, thinking that it's what we think they need, is not good enough anymore. And so the barrier that technology had previously had, to a degree, has been lifted now. And so customers are now dictating to us what they'd like to experience, and technology is not an inhibitor of us being able to do that now. So I think the shift that we're seeing is one from where technology dictated what the experience was going to be, to now customers saying, this is what I want, and we have to change.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, really. I think when you think about it, I think Steve Jobs said this as well, that you start with the user experience and then figure out what the technology is, not the other way around, primarily. But I think you're absolutely right. Look, our clients are changing. The way in which we all communicate has completely changed in our day-to-day life. So thinking that the same people that are using their phones have a different expectation in the corporate world is probably wrong. Actually, there was an interesting statistic that the lady who was presenting from Microsoft just yesterday stated, which was astounding. There's going to be 6.1 billion smartphone users by 2020. And there's going to be 1.7 megabytes of data produced or created every second. I mean, it just tells you the flow of information is so much that it's hard, as we evolve as human beings, intellectually as well, for us to be able to absorb it. So the way in which we can simplify that information for our clients, the way in which we can allow them to view complex information but in simple ways and allow them to make decisions from it, informative decisions, or give them some guidance to it, I think is going to be absolutely fundamental.
I'd even go one step further. I think we spoke earlier about how we used to, in essence, compete on functionality, right? Then what we did was start saying user experience is about taking those products and services and trying to make them simpler. Almost like user experience was the afterthought rather than should the driver, as Lee and yourself outlined. And then again, we went from simplicity to, well, what about intuitiveness? And that's what we should build into our products. Now I think we're at a stage where actually, if driven by the consumer industry first and some of our industry second, it's actually, how can you think about what I want before I even want it, make the decision for me, and then do it for me? So actually, to me, it's even leaps and bounds ahead of giving me the information to consider, consent, make a decision, and move forward. It's do everything for me. You know, I always use the refrigerator example, right? Product development on a refrigerator was how do I make the door open easier? It then evolved to how do, you know, how many shelves do I have? How do the drawers come in and out easier? It's too hard to get the icebox out. It's now evolved to a stage today where your refrigerator realizes you're low on milk, can order it for you, and it can be delivered to your house the next day without you even doing anything. And that to me is a great example of putting user experience and client experience overall at the forefront of the product development.
I'll take it even further than that, and I totally agree with you. I think your refrigerator, in your example, in the future might say, you might be in the mood, I can see, based on your patterns, that you're going to be in the mood for lasagna on Friday. So you're missing these products, you better go and get them. So I think
hungry.
that.
Yeah, and I think we have to also watch for some of the other trends that are emerging. It's not just about getting faster and better at delivering on the needs we understand. It's also around shifting the power dynamic in financial services, democratizing things like advice and product development, and empowering our customers to tell us the business we should be in and tell us that we need more milk in the fridge. I think a huge part of what the industry is trying to do is create product and explain product and push product. And it doesn't matter how many different titles we give executives until you change that dynamic where you're really actually trying to get to the core of what the needs are and deliver on those needs. You're just coming up with slicker ways of pushing product. And I think for us, what we see sort of as a barrier to really becoming customer-centric is when we see the desire to create the user experience, but not fundamentally change that core, not change the way you fund change, not change your P&Ls. And I think a great example is, when customers tell us that they don't want something, that they don't see that as something they value, yet we continue to layer it onto our products. Or when customers tell us that the way something is being delivered doesn't make sense to them, but we continue to explain it to them or explain it or make it more digital. And I think we should watch for that too, because a lot of the time it's still the industry acting on what they think is going to be valuable rather than listening to what is valuable.
You know,
Can
Kendra,
I be
Yeah.
a bit controversial there as well? And actually, it's interesting what you say, because I'm sort of schizophrenic on that slightly personally, but I guess the point is, when you look at Amazon, they say to you, hey, listen, you're buying this, what about these other things?
Sure.
Even though you don't want them, they keep bringing them back. And it's a successful model in some aspects when you think about it.
But the challenge there is, I mean, and we're all here talking about things that are related to financial services, correspondent banking, so on and so forth. You know, we've got to stop falling into the trap of just wanting to deliver that faster horse,
Yeah.
right? You know, it's not about faster horse. You made some comments just a moment ago on this. If we fall into the trap of just trying to think about the narrow what we've got at the moment, we'll lose. Right? We need to be thinking about. I mean, the reason some of these disruptors are being very successful is because, to a degree, they haven't got the burden of the way that we think.
Sure.
Right? And I think that this is really important. Not about creating a faster horse, it's about changing it completely.
And you can take your Amazon example, and it's not actually counterintuitive to what I'm describing, because one of the best things Amazon does is it shows you, and it allows you to tell them when you're wrong. And I think ultimately, when we talk about democratizing that experience, part of what you're trying to say is, we as a financial services organization are not always going to get this right. We're your partner. You're our client. We want to collaborate with you on what you value. So I think it's perfectly fine to predict the need. It's just as important, though, to hear your customer when they tell you, I don't want to pay for that. I don't value that. You didn't deliver that in the way I expected. And to change rapidly to meet that changing expectation.
Kendra, there's something that you said that reminds me. So Aristotle said, I
love quoting Aristotle. That's awesome.
I like to throw around the philosophers. We are what we repeatedly do, right? So what what Amazon does well is they are very consistent in what they do, no matter how you're having that experience with them. So you have I'm dying to try Porter Airlines now, because I've heard a lot of good things about Porter since I've been up here and about the experience. But and it made me think about United. right? So United Airlines, their tagline is "Fly the friendly skies." Oh, that sounds so great, right? But then in April, you see them dragging a 69-year-old guy off of the plane because what they think on that plane is, we got to get this thing out of the gate in time. This guy's in my way, and I'm sure they're also thinking about safety too. I hope, but their behavior is being driven. What you said about the incentives, how they're funded, how they're compensated, they're incented on getting that thing out of the gate. So they're going to drag a 69-year-old guy off of a flight. That's what they're doing. That's what we see. So how do we make that shift from just what we're thinking? And Lee, maybe you can talk about this because you said you guys have this shaping the world and the community so that people can thrive. What are some of the ways that manifests itself? What are some of the things that you're doing to live up to that kind of a promise?
I think that this notion of end-to-end customer experience, especially with the flight example, is really interesting because it's just resonating on that for a moment. It's really really interesting that if your end-to-end experience isn't what you would expect it to be, just one part of it, right? You go away with an understanding that the whole thing was bad. And if you take the flight example, if you have a great check-in, all of us, we came here, we probably got on a plane. If you have a great check-in, you have a great lounge experience, your flight's okay, and your debarking is okay, well then, you can walk away from that saying, I had a great experience. But if, your check-in was rubbish and the rest of it was fantastic, you'll go away thinking that was rubbish. Okay, so I think this is really important. In terms of some of the things that we're doing in terms of driving, so a lot of us in the past might have been driven, for example, by a funding model that was 12 months or 18 months in advance. These are the things that we're going to do. You need to put reams and reams of business case together in order to secure the funding and the investment that you need. But none of that was actually dynamic. Right, it was, here's the money for the 12 months, so on and so forth, right? We've actually taken a model whereby, just in funding, right, and you mentioned this before, we're actually funding quarter by quarter. So you go up and say, I need this funding for this particular block of time, and I will deliver this. And then when you go back, right, towards the end of the quarter, and you've done what you said you were going to do, you've delivered everything you were expecting, and this is what I want to do for the next quarter, well then you get another tranche of funds to keep on going. So you move away from this annual funding model to a more dynamic model that is more representative of the challenges that we have today.
And drive the right behaviors.
And I think you bring up a really good point. I think hopefully what you're alluding to or getting to is really you build small-scale microservices tech, small-scale MVP, and you show value for them quickly, and you adjust. And I think fundamentally having that approach from an organizational level then allows you to do it from I would say, a costing basis as well, I think is absolutely key. So I agree that is absolutely core when you think about development and you think about how you can continue to innovate is key. I mean, Amazon, going back to that, we keep going back to it, but it's an interesting point about user experience. They do exactly that same type of thing. There's 50 user experience changes they apply on average a day. That none of us are probably even aware of when we're using them. So it's that continuous repetition cycle of agile. You reiterate, you make it better, but you don't make it monolithic, and you don't build legacy constraints in it so that you can create hives of applications.
You can't just say it's going to be agile and not do agile.
Absolutely, right? I think that's fundamental.
There's a lot of fake agile.
There's a lot of fake agile. And for me, I feel that being anchored in technology is one of the risks. So I would say MLE, minimum lovable experience, not MVP. And I would also say, for us, what we see is that the obsession with agile, which is something we're watching across the entire industry, is often misinterpreted when you start to see it institutionalized across a bank towards we have to make everything ourselves, we have to be creating all this stuff. A big part of what we're seeing is the change in which you engage with vendors, in which you engage with the capabilities that already exist within your teams, bringing together the necessary component parts from design all the way through. Instead of saying, I'm going to have a vendor platform project over here, I'm going to have a user interface project over here, bringing everyone together and having the change the bank team working with the run the bank team in those models, so that you don't have a great idea that gets killed on actually operationalizing.
This is really important. I mean, we're actually going through a really significant change in our company at the moment to move from, a legacy waterfall with pockets of agile to what we call new ways of work, which is actually scaled agile across the entire organization. And so, this notion of run the bank and change the bank, we're actually, blowing that up to a degree, and we're bringing in app ops and DevOps, right, into agile teams that have got autonomy to actually complete the tasks that they've been given, and not just in one part, it's across the entire organization. And so, when we talk about culture change, this entire change moving from what it was to what it could be is really, really important for us.
Yeah, I want to build a little bit more on the point around bringing in partners, because I think that to me is one of the keys of the changes in organizational culture that's coming, and it's driven a lot by user experience, but also by that acknowledgement of I shouldn't be doing this because I'm not very good at it. And I think the mindset historically in financial services was very much, if I see something interesting from a technology perspective, I buy it, I paint it blue in our example, I stick DB in front of it, and I tell everybody that it's part of my franchise. That mindset's changed a lot, and I think it's changed a lot driven by the fact that if there's part of the value chain that I think someone else, be that a fintech or someone else, can do better than I, provided I'm comfortable that the end-to-end experience of my client and the experience that my client will have, which, by the way, I'll look at first and foremost before I even get into the more detailed aspects, I'm happy to sit in front of a client and say, hi, I'm Dave from Deutsche Bank. I can offer you this 80% that's going to solve your problems. This is my friend Eric from this startup, and he can actually deliver the other 20%. Let's talk together. That is a complete and utter different mindset from how we would engage with clients in the past.
I'd be interested from the audience to know if you see that within your own organizations, this legacy of feeling like you have to own the full experience versus what David's talking about in being in true partnership and being willing to say, hey, this is my partner from such and such that's going to help create a good experience. How many of you, show of hands, feel like you're making that shift to allowing more partnerships versus just owning the experience, really moving to partnerships?
Yeah, and if this was a more retail-oriented room, I'd expect that number of hands to be higher. I definitely, when we talk about ecosystem or platform strategy, that's a big part of what we're talking about, is how to plug into the best-in-class capabilities, how to drive down the cost to serve, and how to know what you're actually really good at. I love that you raised that, because so often there's a tendency to try to be good at everything, and really understanding when there is a capability you will not beat or win, especially in fee compressed segments of our industry. It's really important to get that right and to figure out how to evolve it. There's a tendency towards assuming that you're going to only be plugging into a startup or something brand new. But ultimately what we're seeing in our travels is there's a class of vendors and a class of niche players emerging. And some of them are not kids in Silicon Valley, although there's some great innovation coming from cities like Toronto, New York, and certainly all over the world. We are seeing that some of them are legacy players who are learning how to act as ecosystem players and who are learning how to act differently as partners. And I think that's an important part of the strategy, figuring out how to plug into that, figuring out how to collaborate in the industry, not just with technology partners, but also with adjacent players and those even within our own banks. So a lot of the time we see within the same organization a lack of that collaboration.
I think that's where we have to look at the marketplace, not just ourselves. So if I'm doing this as David Watson, employee of Deutsche Bank, driving Deutsche Bank's offering to our clients alone, I'm already behind. Because if I'm not thinking what the marketplace is doing, what everyone's engaging in, how the market is changing, we are at a Swift conference after all. Like, I suppose I have to plug that community-based, innovation is actually something that can happen ahead of the curve, not just always behind the curve like it used to. It used to always be individual, bilateral, or or one-to-one company innovation that happened. That's a culture shift that I think has started over the last few years, but with the changes to the mindset of marketplace and how the experience you want in a marketplace mindset is totally different.
But you've
How
got to
do you
get
make
really
that shift?
Sorry.
How have you made that shift, and how can others? Because there were just a few hands that went up.
Sure. I mean, for me, look, the phrase multi-banking has often been used in the past to refer to the ability to connect to multiple banks. It's kind of not how I see the term anymore. It's very much the fact that I am perfectly okay now to offer, other bank services through my portal in many instances if it's for the benefit of my client. I offer Deutsche Bank services through other people's engagements, not just other banks, but other industry aspects. I'm happy to have third-party providers, partners, fintechs, and by that I don't just mean startup fintechs, I mean some of the largest companies in the world offer services through my marketplace or mine through theirs. That's not something we used to do very proactively. We used to always look at bilateral host-to-host connections, or here's my window, come and shop in my shop. Now I'm happy to sell my goods on Amazon. Now I'm happy to, put my goods in other people's shops. That's a very, very different mindset from before.
Can I ask, David, how do you then envisage controlling that user experience? So I get it. At this point in time, you've got a provider, fintech that you've got in, works well. It's aligned with your user experience strategy. 2 years down the line, you're embedded. You've got 20 clients using it. Your user experience strategy is completely different to potentially where and he's serving many masters now.
So I'll give you two answers to that one. The first one is, that's a champagne problem I'd love to have. The problem I have at the moment is I'm still trying to learn from how they're doing user experience because it's usually better than mine. But in the champagne world where I get to that problem, I always use the car manufacturer an example. You can design the experience of how you want to drive a Porsche and how you want to drive it, right? German car, sorry. You can design the experience of the Porsche and how you want to drive it, right? What Porsche has is product heads for each segment of the car. They have a head of tires, they have a head of wheels, they have a head of in-car entertainment systems, now those individuals don't go off and work out how to source and build those pieces. In vast majority of cases, they were getting it from someone else. So they may go to Bose for the in-car entertainment system, they may go to Goodyear for the tires. The question then is, how do they manage the quality of those goods that then combine into the minimum experience level, I love that term, by the way, the minimum level of experience that you want to have. Well, that actually becomes the job of your product people and your assembly line people who are then compiling the product. They focus on the experience first, and then that's how they manage their partners or providers. And I do think there's a lot we can learn from that manufacturing industry on how they do it.
I too love this minimum lovable experience concept. But the point in regards to partnerships is really valid, because I think that you need to not only concentrate on, I suppose, the customer using the front end, but also be really good at business partner and business partnership management, right? I mean, traditionally you mentioned it, we were able to be very bilateral in host to host and so on and so forth, but with the advent of open banking and APIs and so on and so forth, we need to make sure that we're not forgetting the experience in business partner management and what I call DX, developer experience. As an example. I think this is really important because, the developers of our partners or fintechs that you want to do business with, if you're offering them out a development toolkit or an SDK that is rubbish, well, then they're going to go somewhere else. So you need to be really, really good at that too. So this is not I mean, it could be a subset or a superset, but you've also got developer experience that's got to work along with with user experience as subsets of customer experience, which is an end-to-end experience.
And I might even push the thinking a little bit there and say, the very notion that you own a customer experience or that you are in control of that is something I would fundamentally challenge. At the end of the day, they are the customer. It's their experience. It's their data. It's their money. It's their decision. You are trying to meet them in an interaction. And I think so much of the hesitancy of doing the right thing would change if we didn't think we could control it, if we didn't think we would control it. It's if we knew that at the end of the day, merciless transparency was a barrier to almost all the experiences that customers demand, it would take a lot of the pressure off us trying to come up with sort of tricky ways to give them a little bit but keep control ourselves. And it would allow us to partner differently with those ecosystem players that we're going to need to. That change sounds really easy, but that's what it takes, is to stop thinking about us creating something we then deliver, and instead thinking of us in human interactions that are enabled by technology.
I'd like to introduce a word, if I may, that I haven't heard, and it's feeling.
Yeah.
I think feeling is, we were very good at banks in designing process.
Right.
Okay, and we can process and function anything. But when you actually overlay the process of something simple like an onboarding experience for a new product, or getting a new security token for authentication or something like that, if you actually go to the client and look at how they feel through that process, you want them to feel, you want the process to be graceful, and you want them to feel grateful at the end of it.
Yeah.
But a lot of the times, if you've not designed it properly and you forget about how the customer feels, they'll just feel relieved that they even got there.
Yeah, it's the psychology of the underlying user primarily. You're absolutely right. I think that's absolutely key to be able to deliver that. And the end-to-end, if you break down in one point in that value chain and the end-to-end.
Yeah. And let's be honest, some of this is getting taken out of our hands anyway. If you look at, not for this panel to distract us, but if you look at PSD2 today and what it's doing, it's in essence taking away the ability for you to control, even if you wanted to, that end-to-end experience, because now you have to literally open your doors and allow other people to come in and take the data and build their experience off the back of that data and services. So the world is changing dramatically, not just by what the client wants, but through what the regulators are doing as well.
I agree.
I think this concept of feeling is very interesting. I have a client that I'm working with right now on a new business launch, and they've used the term hug as sort of the most important thing they want their clients to feel. It happens to be associated with dementia and death in financial advice. But the point that the leaders of this financial services organization started to design what they thought would feel like a hug from their bank, I thought was really interesting, because it's not just about the feeling of lack of friction. It's not just about the feeling like you had, I can trust you. It's about, generally, do I feel connected to you as an organization? And when you put yourself in an institutional context, it's that you actually know who I am as a human being as well as an actor in this institution, or you actually benefit, I actually benefit from my relationship with you. Not just getting a lower cost, not just having good service when I expect it. And I think getting to the next level of feeling will be a massive challenge, especially for those of us who are focusing on the more technical elements of financial services. It's really easy to do it in a retail case.
Adnan mentioned, fail fast, but also in a side conversation, we said that this is an industry that has an aversion to failure, that failure is a bad word, and that this idea of agile and fail fast, maybe that language isn't serving so well because it's not giving people that internal, the talent within the organization has this feeling associated with failure that's very bad. How do we get past that to not just the feeling that the users are having, but internal in the organization?
Yeah. And I think that question, and we did talk about it before the panel, it's really cute to be able to say, let's just create something. If it fails, it's no big deal. But you guys are playing with live ammo. Like these are real businesses with real customers and real market impacts. And you have to be careful not to oversimplify the risk involved in doing things with your customers' money. I do think that there's something in that word failure that does create a boundary. I like the idea of this concept of co-ownership or democratization and really collaborating together, iterating together, creating feedback together, not doing quicker things that we build and release and then hope succeed, but actually changing that full dynamic. And I do think we need to define what are the criteria under which we wouldn't do something again, or what are the criteria on which we're learning from something we've done, versus seeing it as it's either a binary win or a failure. And that's something that's hard in our industry, and I think it's worth having more conversations about that and opening the door to new ways of collaborating that aren't just about introducing flippant risk, right? You're not looking to fail, but you are looking to learn.
Yeah, and I think that's the point. Sorry, please.
Because I think there's somewhere in the middle as well, because coming back to the point that Lee mentioned earlier about the annual budget cycles, which by their nature allude to large packaged multi-year projects, which when you talk about fear of failure, we actually end up giving CPR for sometimes 2 years on a project just because there's no leadership or fear in the leadership itself to even say, yeah, this was a mistake, let's stop. And by the time you finally get there, it's usually 3-4 years in, you've burned millions. Now, when we talk about fail fast in the user experience context, we immediately jump to sort of the utopia of, you start something on a Monday, you work out on the Thursday that it's not working, it doesn't make sense, you kill it, you start something new on the Monday. I think for us in banks, there's somewhere in the middle, which is to get away from these multi-million, multi-year programs that are planned and budgeted on a large waterfall scale, and the sort of micro agile, drive an MVP or an MLE and deliver it fast. There's somewhere in the middle that I think we need to get to as a first step, and quickly. And if you're not already trying to get there, you're probably already too late. But really getting that broken down a lot more, and I think to me is very much the first.
I think we're all saying the same thing in that way. I think a bit of me says, how do you negate that fail fast? How do you negate that negativity that might come out from a idea? And I think you hit the nail on the head that where you said, you've got to have this collaboration. It's got to be collaboration across different business lines and skill sets. So no longer can a technologist, I don't think, should go and develop. No longer should a business person just come up with an idea. It's a cross collaboration. And I think in that type of scenario, the probability of failure still exists, but it's more a redirection. You come up with a solution, and it's just, is it the best solution? Is a different discussion to be had, but it usually germinates and goes somewhere else and finds its best path. But if it's just one business or one specific area working on something, I think that's where you get these scenarios where you come to a dead end and it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, what is fail fast?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, what's the context of it? What's fast?
Yeah, is it
right?
10 days
What's
or 5
fail?
days? Yeah.
Right? Does fail fast actually mean succeed slow? Right? Like I don't know. I think the answer's got to be into some way the context of the piece of whatever it is you're trying to deliver.
Yeah.
Right? Fail fast needs to be better defined so that we can take away some of the fear that might exist in that word failure, because it exists, right?
Totally.
Absolutely. I mean, you would see this
All
in
the
the companies that you deal with.
Yeah, and I think the things that we would see as criteria there, we've hit on some of them. The concept of understanding who we're trying to be as an organization and the type of experience at the highest level we want to have. It's about changing the way you fund. It's also about changing the way you run your P&Ls. I mean, one of the best things that we've been seeing in sort of leading organizations is the lining up of collaborative capabilities under one executive, the operating model changing to enable the collaboration that everyone knows they should have. And certainly we expect that. And then, really understanding who your users are, who your clients are, both internal and external, and having them co-own that design. So, for us, we do a lot of design work for our clients. And certainly we would see some clients where the home office team or the product team or whomever that business owner team is sitting in a room with a great partner like ours, but there's no users in the room. I also have clients that will do design sessions and there'll be no one from home office in the room. And I do think the ground is in the middle. And I think getting that right and understanding what makes your organization different, how you bring exceptional servicing to the market, what is it that your customers want to pay for? Because one of the biggest mistakes we've been making is assuming what people want to pay for, what they value, and then designing around that. I mean, that in and of itself is a missed opportunity that a lot of folks that are new to the industry are not constrained by. So I think all of those things need to come in, and certainly constant, high-paced, intense change that makes people uncomfortable is something that is now the standard for the industry. And if anyone is resisting that, you need to help them evolve or move out of the way, because ultimately that is the future of our industry for the foreseeable future. It will be uncomfortable. It will happen faster than we want. We will not know the destination, and we will need to move.
No pressure. Everybody's like ready to flee the industry.
So run. Yeah.
So let me just dig in a little bit further to something you said in terms of bringing the customer in the room and not, going off into a silo and a bubble and designing things for people whose perspective you don't even have. What have you seen? How are you bringing that perspective into the room within your organization?
I mean, for us, I think it's what is a product, right? A product is a solution to a problem. Why do you buy a bottle of water? It's because you're thirsty and you're willing to pay to get it. You're solving a problem. So to me, the journey starts with being the agony aunt. The journey starts with trying to understand what problem is your client trying to solve. And I work in cash management. Some of the panel, and we're all familiar with payments and cash. One of the issues we had in banks is that we thought that the process and the product and the problem started with how do I make a payment? Well, actually, for majority of our clients, that's already too late. The problem they're trying to solve was at the front end. So until you actually go to your clients or bring your clients into your product design, development, and delivery process and actually say, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Is it that you're trying to move money from here to here? Or actually, is it something totally different? And that's an afterthought. And how can we help you solve the problem that's totally different? Not only does that help you find products and services that your clients are willing to pay for, that's partnership.
Yeah.
That's actually a client partnership
I
relationship.
really agree with this because none of us get out of bed and jump out of bed and say, I'm going to make a payment today.
I usually try and avoid it.
Yeah, I mean, because it's as other things. I'm thirsty, so I want to buy a bottle of water. I need caffeine. I need a coffee. The experience part is interesting in terms of what you can do. We've done a lot of work over the last 12 months, especially in bringing customers in to. You might call it a lab, but it's effectively a customer experience facility whereby, we're actually taking our designs and showing them to a customer, and then we're looking at the way that they do simple things like manipulate around a screen, watch what they do and how they do it, and then, being able to take that back, redesign, and then throw it back out and say, well, how about this?
Yeah.
Right? Is this better now, right? Because this reducing this friction in this experience is really, really important. Yeah. Not only from a customer experience perspective, but also it sort of starts to get into some behavioural analytics.
You have to be willing to change based on the feedback, though, and that's one of the biggest things we see break down. If your customer says they don't like something, and then you then go off and realize you can't influence whatever it is they didn't like, and so then you go back and explain to them why they should like it. I think it's an interesting thing to think through. Not only how do you give them visibility into the process and engage them, but how do they co-own it? So I'll give an example around client data. We often see organizations invest huge amounts of organizational money and energy towards building a much deeper, richer view of client data. And we've started to notice that if you just disclose to your customers, this is the data I do have, this is how I'm using the data, this is what I'm looking at, these are the patterns I'm seeing. Increasingly, customers are saying, oh, you're missing this one piece of data, or you're making the wrong assumption about me. This is something that we're seeing in retail work really well, and ultimately in financial services, it's starting to pop up. But you have to get over the idea that the only way to get aggregation is for you to build it and they to come to you, and you own that data on them, and you don't want them to know what you know about them. You have to get over some of those hurdles and invite them into that co-ownership in order to get it.
This is right. It is not our data. It's their data.
It's their.
Yeah.
Right? It's their experience. It's how they feel.
Yeah.
Right. Then they might. I mean, we don't own really.
In that
A whole
spirit of
customer
engagement and their experience, let's reach out to the audience and see if there are some questions from the audience. And if you ask a question, somebody will bring a microphone to you. If you just tell us your name and organization, that would be great. So there's a question right up here in the front, please. Try to see people through the light here.
Hi, Alec Hoffman, Sapient Razorfish. Just a quick question on all the conversation about creativity and feelings and process. How do you all feel a native understanding of creativity by business people, right? Not that we're not all business people, but the lines of business heads and so on and so forth. How does creativity and their understanding help, hurt, hinder, or slow down the process of culture change in these areas?
I'm going to start. I think in general, there's something intimidating for those people who have grown up in financial services who are knocking against this type of change when they feel that the only way to be creative is to wear sneakers or a hoodie, or the only way to do something new is to be young or a startup. A big part of what we're seeing the best-in-class organizations understand is how to tap into the inherent creativity in their DNA, of their culture, of their organization, how to demonstrate and grow that capability and not just experience it from the outside. And it's important that there's that sense of purpose and understanding, but also that these organizations are playing to their strengths. So a lot of times, the concept that the best design is going to come from an outsider or that the best idea is going to come from a startup really shuts down the creativity that already exists within large organizations. And I think really tapping into that is what we're seeing as a success factor, because it will never become more than just a side project unless the executives running these organizations feel it's core to the business that they run.
Yeah, I'd agree. Look, I think it starts right from the top in that ideology. But I also think there is this internal marketing campaign that you have to go on and to explain to people that this is good. This is something that's positive. You can affect change across the organization. And I think that's the thing. We all are here to affect change, positive change for our clients. And if you can embed that as the ideology and philosophy within the organization, I think from that comes creativity, but it absolutely comes from the top, absolutely.
I think that it's interesting. Traditionally, if you look at product management in a corporate bank, you've got somebody responsible for this part, and somebody responsible for that part, and somebody responsible for this other part. And the applications that service those were relatively monolithic and not dynamic, or at least not dynamic enough for the future. And with the world of APIs and interconnectivity moving forward, actually, cutting the heads off some of these products and actually taking some of those microservices together actually creates new products. So if I take, for example, a cross-border payment, couple it with FX and a foreign currency account, right? 3 discrete products, 3 discrete product managers. Yeah. But when you amalgamate those services together and curate them, you've actually created something new, right? Now, is that creativity? I don't know, but it's driving different people's way of thinking. The way that we had distribution, the way that we sold this stuff, the way that we product managed this stuff in the past, it's going to have to change in order for us to be successful. Because if you take, I know we're very corporate focused, but if we sort of delve down into retail for a moment, these discrete services are relatively, in most banks, owned by the corporate parts of the bank. But what are retail customers doing? They're not using banks for cross-border payments. They're going to TransferWise and MoneyGram and Western Union and so on and so forth. Why? Because it hasn't been packaged up well enough. And so if you can take these discrete services, cut the head off the product, create a new curated service for the future, and then offer it out in a different way, I think that's creative, right? It's different. It's not a faster horse, which is something I talked about before.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you for that question. A question in the back over there.
First of all, thank you. It was a very great discussion we experienced. I have a question. In an organization, when I build a functionality or a feature, it is the developer who's given us a requirement spec or a low-level design who would build a component. And he or she may not be rightly connected with the end user of that application, but he or she looks at the application from the code spec or requirement spec. But as against it, the user experience, I believe, should be different, right? There should be a zero distance between a creator of an experience and the ultimate user of that experience, right? How do you build that culture change where the creator and the user are connected and, seamlessly connected?
Yeah, I think we can probably all talk to that extensively and passionately. For me, I think the simple fact that in old school product development in this space, a salesperson or a couple of salespeople would go and see a client. They would listen to what the client wants or think what the client wants. Meanwhile, actually, for the majority of the meeting, they're salespeople, so they probably spoke for 95% of the time and only listened for 5%. They then come back, tell a product person what needs to be done, maybe in front of a whiteboard, maybe not. Product person then calls someone from tech, design, gets in front of another whiteboard, redraws it, a PowerPoint gets made, then a Word doc, which gets made into a more detailed spec, another more detailed spec, which gets given to a developer, probably in another country. In fact, probably all those people are in different countries. And then we wonder why what the developer builds doesn't actually do what the client needs, or certainly isn't tied to their experience and how they do it quickly. Yeah, that has to change. And those that are not already or have not already changed that are in real trouble. The simple idea that actually you can't put developers in the room with your clients because they're going to be too geeky and too IT, and maybe they're in another country, that's a naive mindset and one that will have you fail. Your developers need exposure to your users.
Yeah, that
And
Chinese
if you do not have
whispers,
exposure to those users,
Yeah.
that
you're in
Chinese
trouble.
whispers needs to change, because it's lost in translation, in all honesty, sometimes. And I think fundamentally, I think there was a question about, what do people need to do, is in terms of getting to what clients want, but actually understanding why, and being at the forefront of it.
Yeah.
Being at the forefront of listening to your client and just sitting there listening.
And sorry, and
Go for it.
go for it.
I was just going to say listening, and then from that, even though the client might be asking for something, the underlying resultant technology that you develop for them may be something completely different, because when you look through it with a different lens, from a product person, from a techie person, the result or what they need is something completely different, what they're trying to get to.
And this amalgam of connecting developers and customers and making sure that you understand a lot better, it's vitally important. Otherwise, Agile won't fix that problem unless you actually connect the two.
Yeah.
Because all that Agile will do is it'll help you deliver faster rubbish.
Yeah.
Okay, so this I wanted green. No, you get black. By connecting these two, it'll help you solve the problem. But we have to be less mechanical about it.
Yeah.
I mean, what you explained, Dave, was a very mechanical process, but we probably all live it.
Yeah.
But the reason I think we live it is because when you think about organizations, traditionally they have been about pillars, or structures. And to go across pillars, sometimes it creates strains. But I think being understanding at the organizational level and having that philosophy of a virtual group, that you bring together to really collaborate, as we've all been saying, and then disband once the solution's produced. You don't need to be together. You go back. So I think having that creates less.
I think one of the things that's important, if you want to get to the heart of it, is to move away from the idea that I find a need, I create a product, I pitch the product. I think ultimately moving away from being hyper transactional and hyper product oriented is one of the biggest mind shifts that needs to be made. And many times, if you actually listen to clients, there's whole things that they expect, want, or would be wowed by that you will not directly make revenue from, but are going to be part of creating the dynamic on which you can make revenue on the right things. And unfortunately, what we tend to do is optimize within these product silos, because that's how we're making money. I think your comment around decoupling the products and combining them in different ways to create new things is really key. I think it's also important to think about the non-transactional, non-product elements of the experience and how committed you are as an organization to delivering well on those, because that's where you get into well, we're not going to invest a ton, that's basically just marketing, or we're not going to invest a ton because there's no ROI. But it's that mind shift that, if shifted towards really being customer obsessed, can get you into a place where you've created the platform, you've created the place people come, rather than you trying to do it faster or smarter than someone who's really been customer obsessed.
Well, I think we have time for one more question. We'll go to this side of the room. Gentleman in the white, in the back there. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
We'll sneak into.
Thank you so much for the discussion. One question, because I've heard some of you mention that you broke these silos of run the bank and change the bank. So the question is, how do you deal with priorities while you're trying to reinvent yourself and focus on new customer experiences, while trying to keep the lights on with legacy systems?
Yeah, I mean, for us, change the bank and run the bank was nothing other than an accounting exercise. The principles behind the segregation kind of got lost over the years, and it became nothing other than an accounting exercise. And I think really by bringing tech spend back into one bucket so that people that own that environment, who know it better than anyone, who know the ins and outs of the systems, the landscape, the technology underlying, and have them say, this is way more important, we have to do this today rather than this, happening at that level rather than where we had it before, at budgeting and accounting and business manager level, has actually led us to a much better approach to understanding when is it more important that I spend on maintenance or remediation or regulatory spend even, rather than certain aspects of enhancement. Empowering the people who own that individual area or space a little bit more to make those recommendations and decisions has really helped us.
Yes, certainly separating the delivery of experience from the underlying technology and creating the flexibility to swap out capabilities and enhance capabilities as you go is something that we're seeing leading organizations do. The amount of pressure on the industry is so high that fundamentally a lot of those legacy platforms are being fully recontemplated. And certainly the technology partners that exist today are looking to help you solve some of those barriers to change. It's just, how do you do it in such a way that you don't need to put a 3 or 5 year roadmap between yourself and the experience you're trying to build? And there is a bit of a trick to that, certainly. But increasingly, we're seeing those organizations come together and think about capital and how they deploy it in a much more deliberate way.
Okay.
I mean, the only thing I would just add to that is that to me, it's just about talking and communicating, understanding the run the bank. Is there value from it also from a development of the bank, let's say, and seeing are there synergies between the two? So I think that helps prioritization, absolutely, but run the bank is absolutely essential fundamentally. It keeps you going. It's your livelihood, I guess, is the point. But understanding that develop the bank is also key now.
And one could argue that faster, more iterative delivery reduces the need for prioritization. Prioritization can, to a degree, is a function of perhaps an accounting function or a funding cycle or so on and so forth. So if you get better at delivery, better at iterative delivery, prioritization becomes less of a problem.
All right, so thank you. We are at our time, so please join me in thanking our panel for a very healthy discussion on this.